La 10e.
The 10,189th meeting of the Security Council is called to order. I would like to take this opportunity to pay tribute on behalf of the Security Council to Her Excellency Ms. Leonor Zalabata-Torres, the permanent representative of Colombia, for her service as President of the Council for the month of June. I am sure I speak for all members of the Council when I express my deep appreciation to Ambassador Zalabata-Torres, as well as her entire team. We're grateful for the great diplomatic skill with which they steered the Council's business last month. The provisional agenda for this meeting is the situation in the Middle East. The agenda is adopted. In accordance with Rule 37 of the Council's Provisional Rules of Procedure, I invite the representatives of Kuwait and the Islamic Republic of Iran to participate in this meeting. It is so decided. In accordance with Rule 39 of the Council's Provisional Rules of Procedure, I invite Ms. Elizabeth Speha, Assistant Secretary General, Department of Political and Peacebuilding Affairs, to participate in this meeting. It is so decided. The Security Council will now begin its consideration of item 2 on the agenda. I give the floor to Ms. Elizabeth Speha.
Merci, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you, President.
Mr. President, last weekend witnessed a troubling resurgence of military confrontations between the United States and Iran, even as mediation efforts continued in Doha under the auspices of Qatar to advance the implementation of the 17 June Memorandum of Understanding. The Secretary-General welcomes the joint decision to de-escalate and exercise restraint. This decision offers a measure of hope that dialogue and diplomacy can regain momentum. At the same time, the events of the weekend serve as a stark reminder of the fragility of the current situation and the acute risks of further escalation. Mr. President, while developments surrounding the recent escalation have been widely reported, allow me to provide a concise overview of the facts as we understand them. On 25 June, an Iranian drone struck the Singapore-flagged cargo merchant vessel Ever Lovely as it attempted to transit the Strait of Hormuz. The International Maritime Organization is reviewing the incident. Around the same time, a drone struck the Panama-flagged tanker Kiku near the strait as it transited along a route along the coast of Oman. The United States described these incidents as violations of the Memorandum of Understanding and as threats to freedom of navigation. The International Maritime Organization temporarily paused its evacuation corridor for stranded seafarers and vessels in the region. On 26 June, the United States carried out strikes on Iran's coastal military infrastructure in Hormozgan province, followed by a second wave of strikes the following day. The United States military characterized these actions as a, quote, direct response to continued Iranian aggression against commercial shipping, unquote, adding that Iran had, quote, elected not to, unquote, comply with the agreed ceasefire. The Iranian Foreign Ministry characterized the strikes as a, quote, blatant violation, unquote, of the Memorandum of Understanding, including its ceasefire-related provisions. Overnight into 28 June, Iran said it had targeted United States military infrastructure in the Gulf, launching ballistic missiles and armed drones. According to Iranian statements, targets included Ali al-Salem Air Base in Kuwait and the United States Fifth Fleet headquarters in Bahrain. Iran warned that further, quote, violations of the ceasefire, unquote, would result in a, quote, complete halt of ongoing diplomatic processes, unquote, while also threatening a, quote, crushing response, unquote, to any additional United States military action. Later on 28 June, the United States conducted further strikes on Iran. The President of the United States warned of additional escalation should Iran fail to comply with the ceasefire, indicating a readiness to intensify military action if necessary. The United States reported no casualties among its personnel and no damage to its installations in Bahrain and Kuwait. The Bahrain Defense Force reported intercepting several Iranian aerial threats. Bahrain's Interior Ministry also reported that a residential building had been damaged. No casualties were reported. This followed an earlier round of Iranian drone strikes on Bahraini territory on 27 June. In Kuwait, authorities reported intercepting 2 ballistic missiles in their airspace on 28 June, following earlier defensive responses to missile and drone threats. Mr. President, the Secretary General unequivocally condemns all attacks against civilians and civilian infrastructure. Such actions are unacceptable. Residential areas, ports, energy facilities, commercial vessels, and maritime personnel must be protected. The Secretary General has consistently underscored the importance of upholding navigational rights. Merchant shipping should not be used as a tool of pressure, and the security of international maritime routes must not be compromised. While maritime traffic is below pre-crisis levels, it continues, reflecting efforts to stabilize global supply routes. Every effort must be made to restore flows of oil, gas, fertilizer, and other critical commodities, thereby alleviating pressures on the global economy. We are encouraged by ongoing discussions aimed at strengthening guarantees for safe navigation in the Strait of Hormuz. In this regard, we note that Iran and Oman held talks on 29 June on the implementation of relevant provisions of the Memorandum of Understanding. Mr. President, on 28 June, the United States and Iran agreed to cease attacks on one another. It was further announced that Qatar would host indirect talks between the parties in Doha starting on 30 June on the implementation of the Memorandum of Understanding. These talks are ongoing. The United Nations welcomes the resumption of dialogue between the United States and Iran and encourages both sides to sustain engagement to advance the implementation of the 17 June Memorandum of Understanding. The breadth of the regional diplomatic engagement, including efforts by Qatar, Pakistan, Oman, and others, reflects the gravity of this moment. Continued coordination and constructive dialogue will be essential, both to manage immediate tensions and to lay the groundwork for longer-term confidence-building measures. Each new strike, each new interception, each new maritime incident increases the risk of miscalculation. After months of dangerous escalation, a return to full-scale hostilities would have catastrophic consequences for the peoples of the region, for international peace and security, and for the global economy. We therefore urge all parties to act with maximum restraint, to avoid actions that could undermine the ceasefire or close the door to diplomacy, and to comply fully with their obligations under international law, including the protection of civilians and civilian infrastructure and the preservation of freedom of navigation. Sustained political will and continued engagement will be critical to overcoming the current challenges and achieving a mutually acceptable and lasting agreement. At this juncture, the unified support of this Council for Diplomacy is more important than ever. The United Nations remains committed to supporting all efforts to prevent a return to conflict, restore stability, and advance a comprehensive and durable resolution of this conflict. Thank you.
I thank Ms. Speha for her briefing. I now give the floor to members of the Council wishing to deliver statements. I give the floor to His Excellency, Mr. Abdulatif bin Rashid Al Zayani, Minister for Foreign Affairs of Bahrain.
شكرا سيد الرئيس.
Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. President, Excellencies, distinguished members of the Security Council, at the outset, may I congratulate the Democratic Republic of the Congo on assuming the presidency of the Security Council for this month, and thank the Republic of Colombia for its presidency last month. I also extend my appreciation to the Assistant Secretary General of the United Nations for peace-building support for her valuable briefing. I thank this esteemed Council for responding to our request to convene this urgent meeting. And I thank the Council for its response and the participating and attending countries, in particular our colleagues from the GCC countries and the Hashemite Kingdom of Jordan. I speak today on behalf of the Kingdom of Bahrain, the state that has been directly targeted and harmed by a renewed and treacherous Iranian attack this week, involving ballistic missiles and armed drones directed against densely populated civilian areas, despite the fact that Iran signed the Islamabad Memorandum of Understanding with the United States on 17th June, which explicitly provided for the cessation of military operations on all fronts. The Kingdom of Bahrain requested this emergency meeting because of its recognition of the Council's primary responsibility for the maintenance of international peace and security, and in the confidence that this Council, having condemned the Iranian attacks against the GCC states and Jordan in its resolution 2817, will not remain a bystander in the face of such a blatant challenge to its authority. What the Kingdom of Bahrain has recently endured is not an isolated incident, but is instead part of a continuous series of attacks that began on 28 February and have continued even after the signing of the Memorandum of Understanding, and indeed continue to this day. The Kingdom of Bahrain is one of the most densely populated countries in the world, the most densely populated in the Arab world, and third most densely populated globally. Industrial and critical infrastructure is situated in close proximity to residential neighborhoods within a limited geographical area. Over this period, Bahrain has been subjected to a total of 808 attacks, comprising 203 ballistic missiles and 605 armored drones. These attacks deliberately targeted civilian facilities, critical infrastructure, and residential areas, resulting in the deaths of 3 innocent civilians and injuries to 465 others, including women and children. Had it not been for the precautionary measures taken by the competent authorities, the consequences would have been far more devastating. The effects of these attacks have extended well beyond human and material losses. They terrorized peaceful civilians, spread fear among the population, and severely disrupted normal daily life. Conduct expressly prohibited under the international humanitarian law, which criminalizes acts whose primary purpose is to spread terror among civilians. The precision with which the targets were selected and the repeated targeting of the same civilian sites demonstrates that these attacks were neither random nor incidental. Rather, They reflect deliberate, premeditated, and systematic planning carried out according to a systematic approach rather than as spontaneous reactions. Repetition alone removes any doubt and establishes intent. The facts on the ground also disprove Iran's claim that these attacks are directed solely against military objectives. What possible military justification exists for targeting a water desalination plant, densely populated residential neighborhoods, civilian facilities, and critical infrastructure? The kingdom has documented every attack from the moment it took place and has submitted official communications supported by comprehensive evidence to the Secretary General and the President of the Security Council, leaving no room for allegations of exaggeration or politicization. In this regard, the kingdom has distributed to the members of this esteemed council copies of photographic evidence illustrating some of these attacks, and I encourage all members to review them. This visual documentation shows the damage inflicted on vital industrial facilities, occupied residential buildings, and civilian and educational facilities. You can see it. These images represent only a small sample of the overall destruction, yet they are sufficient to reveal the true nature of these attacks. The deliberate targeting of civilian lives, not military objectives, as falsely claimed by Iran. Mr. President, perhaps the most alarming example of this pattern occurred in the early hours of 5 April, when an Iranian drone targeted operational units at the Gulf Petrochemical Industries Company in Sitra, striking an ammonia storage tank located within a densely populated residential area. Had it not been for precautionary measures and the decision to empty the tank beforehand, the release of toxic ammonia gas could have caused a catastrophic humanitarian disaster. Containing the danger required the establishment of a precautionary exclusion zone extending 2 kilometers and the evacuation of nearby residents. Targeting a facility containing hazardous substances within a populated civilian area amounts to a war crime. A legal characterization publicly affirmed by national authorities and is expressly prohibited under Additional Protocol 1 to the Geneva Conventions. As for the claim that this aggression is merely a response to the acts of another state, Bahrain is an independent sovereign nation that is not a party to any conflict. Any state that has a dispute with another must address it directly, not transfer its consequences onto civilians in a third country. Nor is this aggression directed solely against Bahrain. It threatens the security of the entire region. It has coincided with attacks in the vicinity of Kuwait International Airport, one of the most important civilian facilities in the state of Kuwait, posing a grave threat to civil aviation safety and the security of international air navigation, matters that should be of serious concern to this Council. And these attacks launched by Iran and its proxies are not confined to any single state. This Council previously convened an emergency meeting at Bahrain's request following an attack by a drone on the Baraka nuclear power plant in UAE, causing a fire in an external electrical generator and bringing the region to the brink of a nuclear safety disaster. This Council rightly condemned that attack as a flagrant violation of international law. Taken together, the pattern is unmistakable. From a chemical facility to a civilian airport to a nuclear power station, these are not military targets, as Iran claims, but part of a systematic campaign against the critical infrastructure upon which civilian life in our countries depends. These attacks constitute a clear violation of the Charter of the United Nations and Security Council Resolution 2817, which was supported by 136 member states. Even more troubling, they continued after Iran committed under the Memorandum of Understanding to a permanent cessation of military operations, only to breach that commitment within days. This is not an isolated incident. It forms part of a recurring pattern of failing to honor international commitments, demonstrating that what ultimately matters is not who signs an agreement, but who faithfully implements it. Mr. President, in light of the foregoing, the Kingdom's principal demand is the immediate and complete cessation of these attacks. Accordingly, the Kingdom calls upon this esteemed Council to reaffirm its condemnation of the repeated Iranian attacks, require the Iranian regime to cease them immediately, and fully comply with Resolution 2817 and its obligations under international law, and establish an effective mechanism to monitor implementation and ensure accountability. The Kingdom further reaffirms its inherent right of self-defense under Article 51 of the Charter of the UN, while remaining fully committed to exercising the utmost restraint and to pursuing peaceful solutions. The credibility of this Council is measured by its ability to protect peaceful nations and deter aggressors. The value of its resolutions lies not in their adoption, but in their implementation. What value does a resolution have if its violation carries no consequences? The beginning and end of this matter is simple. These attacks must stop immediately. We are confident that this Council will rise to that responsibility. Thank you, Mr. President.
I thank His Excellency Mr. Al-Zayani for the statement. I now give the floor to the representative of Greece. Thank you, President. Allow me to begin by congratulating you on your accession to the Council's presidency for the month of July, and I wish you every success. I wish to assure you that you can count on our constructive commitment. I would also like to congratulate Colombia for the successful presidency throughout the month of June.
Elizabeth Specker for her briefing. Greece is deeply alarmed by the latest missile and drone attacks reportedly directed by Iran against the Kingdom of Bahrain and Kuwait. We unequivocally condemn these attacks and express our full solidarity with Bahrain, as well as with all countries in the region that continue to be targeted. Our GCC partners did not seek to be drawn into this conflict and should not be exposed to attacks on their territory, people, or critical infrastructure. These actions are a clear violation of Security Council Resolution 2817 of the Charter of the United Nations and of international law. From the outset, Greece has stood by her GCC partners. Moreover, in this new environment in the Middle East, GCC countries are indispensable partners to collectively act and shape a regional security architecture which will ensure long-term security and stability. Safeguarding the sovereignty and territorial integrity of Bahrain and other countries in the region. Mr. President, the ceasefire agreements in the region continue to be fragile and risks of further escalation remain high. Greece strongly supports the ongoing diplomatic efforts and in particular the negotiations between the United States and Iran so as to create the conditions for sustained de-escalation, address legitimate security concerns, and bring a stable and lasting peace in the region. At the same time, we strongly believe that Iran must never acquire a nuclear weapon. Preservation of the non-proliferation regime is a precondition for sustainable stability. Full cooperation with the IAEA, transparency, safeguards, compliance, and verification are essential to rebuild trust and assure the exclusively peaceful nature of Iran's nuclear program. We call for a swift resumption of cooperation between Iran and IAEA, including through a visit by IAEA inspectors in Iran as soon as possible. Diplomacy must remain the path to be followed in order to produce an effective, verifiable, and durable outcome. Finally, Mr. President, Greece attaches paramount importance to maritime security and freedom of navigation. The Strait of Hormuz must immediately return to the status quo ante of safe, normal, and unimpeded passage. All vessels should enjoy the right of transit passage in accordance with UNCLOS without any form of obstruction, intimidation, or interference, including mines, unlawful fees, tolling, or other restrictions, including after the 60 days period. The strait should not be used as a bargaining chip in the current negotiations and beyond, as disruptions in the strait affect not only the countries of the region, but also global trade, energy security, food security, and international peace and security. The implementation of the agreement will contribute to the gradual normalization of maritime traffic and the restoration of confidence in international shipping. At this critical juncture, the Security Council must send a clear and united message. Attacks against countries of the region must stop. Resolution 2817 must be fully implemented. Maritime security and freedom of navigation must be safeguarded, and diplomacy must prevail. I thank you.
Je remercie.
I thank the representative of Greece for the statement. I now give the floor to the representative of the United Kingdom.
Thank you, President. And let me start by congratulating the DRC on assuming the presidency for the month of July. You can count on our support. I also thank the delegation of Colombia for their excellent stewardship of the Council for the month of June. I thank ASG Speha for briefing us today, and I welcome Foreign Minister Al Zayani of Bahrain back to the Council, as well as the representative of Kuwait. President, the United Kingdom strongly condemns Iran's reckless attacks against Bahrain and Kuwait and on international shipping in the Strait of Hormuz. First, these attacks are directly contrary to Resolution 2817, put civilian lives in danger, and risk destabilizing an already fragile region. We stand in solidarity with Bahrain, Kuwait, and all our partners across the Gulf. The United Kingdom remains committed to regional security and stability, and we will continue to provide practical support to strengthen the defense and security of our partners. Second, the UK gives our strong backing to the International Maritime Organization's efforts to evacuate vessels and seafarers, which have seen a number of vessels able to safely exit the strait, some after months of being stranded. The IMO have had to pause their efforts as a direct result of these attacks, and we hope they will be able to resume their work as soon as possible. We call for the right of transit passage to be fully restored in the Strait of Hormuz, in accordance with international law, as reflected in the United Nations Convention on the Law of the Sea. It is critical that the strait is free from the threat of violence and any form of tolls or unlawful impediments, and that all parties comply with their obligations under international law. The UK is committed to playing our part to achieve this, including through a strictly defensive and independent multinational military mission led jointly with our French partners to provide reassurance to commercial shipping. Finally, President, the UK welcomes and supports the implementation of the US-Iran Memorandum of Understanding and the ongoing negotiations. We recognize this as a moment of opportunity to restore stability, not only for the region, but also for the global economy. It is essential that global security and economic interests are safeguarded under a final agreement. And I thank you.
I thank the representative of the United Kingdom. I now give the floor to the representative of Denmark.
Thank you, Mr. President, and we congratulate the DRC on assuming the presidency of the Security Council for the month of July. You can count on our support. And we also thank Colombia for steering us through a very busy June. Let me also thank ASG Elisabeth Speha for her briefing. Denmark strongly condemns Iran's recent drone and missile attack against Bahrain, Kuwait, and in the Strait of Hormuz. We stand in full solidarity with the people of Bahrain and Kuwait and all countries in the region which have been targeted by Iran's indiscriminate attacks. Mr. President, the recent attacks by Iran are unacceptable. They pose a threat to the safety and stability of the entire region. They're putting civilian lives at risk, and they undermine efforts to achieve peace and security, while also negatively impacting the freedom of navigation. We reiterate our call for de-escalation and our call on all parties to show maximum restraint and comply with international law, including international humanitarian law. Resolutions of this Council must also be respected. In Resolution 2817, the Security Council demanded the immediate cessation of all attacks by Iran against countries of the region. Denmark urgently calls for its full implementation. Mr. President, these attacks risk destabilizing an already volatile situation. This is not only impact civilians across the Middle East, but reverberates far beyond, as we have seen with Iran's unlawful closure of the Strait of Hormuz. As a maritime nation, Denmark has continuously called for respect for freedom of navigation. Iran's actions in and around the Strait of Hormuz have led to food shortages, rises in energy prices, and other adverse effects across the world. They also undermine international efforts to restore regional security. Denmark welcomes the Memorandum of Understanding between the United States and Iran. We also thank Pakistan, Qatar, and all other mediators for their efforts. This agreement represents a moment of opportunity to restore regional stability, restore a fully open Strait of Hormuz with safe passage, and ensure that Iran never acquires a nuclear weapon. It is vital that the ceasefire is sustained, and we encourage the parties to continue negotiations within the framework of the MoU to achieve a permanent end to this war. In closing, we reiterate our call for de-escalation and a durable solution. Denmark remains committed to ensuring freedom of navigation in the Strait of Hormuz and supporting efforts to safeguard peace, security, and stability in the Middle East and beyond. I thank you.
I thank the representative of Denmark for the statement. I now give the floor to the representative of Panama. Thank you, Mr. President. We'd like to thank Ms. Elizabeth Spihar, Assistant Secretary General for the Department of Political and Peacebuilding Affairs, for her briefing. Furthermore, we welcome His Excellency Abdulatif bin Rashid Al Zayani, Minister for Foreign Affairs of the Kingdom of Bahrain. We also recognize here the presence of the permanent representatives of the State of Kuwait and the Islamic Republic of Iran, who are joining us for this meeting. Excellencies, we regret that the reason for this meeting is a fresh indiscriminate attack against the Kingdom of Bahrain and the State of Kuwait, perpetrated in blatant violation of their sovereignty and territorial integrity and in contravention of the Charter of the United Nations and international law. Such events once again put the civilian population at risk and fuel regional instability. We cannot allow such action to become normalized. Respect for the sovereignty, territorial integrity, and the prohibition on the use or the threat of use of force represent fundamental principles of the international order and must be respected by all states without exception. Equally worrisome is the fact that the decisions of this Council continue to go unheeded. Resolution 2817 of 2026, supported by 136 states, clearly requires the Islamic Republic of Iran to immediately and unconditionally cease any provocation or threat against neighboring states. Failure to comply with this resolution not only erodes the Security Council's authority, but also undermines regional and international efforts to achieve a durable solution. For this reason, we call on the Islamic Republic of Iran to fully comply with its obligations under international law and with the resolutions of this Council, to halt any action or threat that might worsen the situation, and to opt for dialogue and diplomacy as the only path towards preserving international peace and security. President, it is essential to fully restore safety and navigation in the region as a condition for the normalization of international trade and the stability of global supply chains. In this context, we reiterate our steadfast commitment to freedom of navigation and to full respect for international law of the sea, particularly the United Nations Convention on the Law of the Sea. This legal framework represents the basis of the legal order of the oceans. It guarantees essential rights and obligations for international maritime security. Panama roundly condemns the recent attack against a Panamanian flagged ship on the 27th of June in the Strait of Hormuz, which was carrying around 2 million barrels of oil. This event is absolutely unacceptable and represents a grave threat to international maritime security. We demand full respect for international law and the security of seafarers. In addition, we recognize and support the work of the Secretary General of the IMO, Arsenio Dominguez, and the Secretariat of the organization, whose efforts have contributed to facilitating the safe evacuation of 115 vessels and approximately 2,500 seafarers who remained in the Strait of Hormuz. We fully trust that the ongoing diplomatic efforts will enable progress towards the full implementation of the Memorandum of Understanding between the United States and Iran, as well as enabling a constructive step towards the easing of tensions and building regional stability. Thank you. I thank the representative of Panama for that statement. And I now give the floor to the representative of the Russian Federation.
President, at the outset, we'd like to thank the Colombian delegation for their presidency of the Security Council in June. And you, Mr. President, we'd like to congratulate you on assuming the presidency of the Security Council for the month of July. We wish colleagues from the DRC every success throughout their presidency. You can count on our support. We welcome the participation in today's meeting of the Minister of Foreign Affairs of Bahrain, Mr. Abdulatif bin Rashid Al Zayani. We thank ASG Elizabeth Speha for her briefing. Since the start of the escalation of the conflict in the Middle East in late February 2026, the Russian Federation took a principled and objective position vis-à-vis developments. Russia has consistently condemned the aggression waged by the US and Israel against Iran. We pointed out that strikes on civilian infrastructure in all countries of the region are unacceptable. We stressed the need for respect for the sovereignty and territorial integrity of countries in the region as well. We're in favor of resolving the situation through political and diplomatic channels. There is, nor can there be, alternatives to this path. Against this backdrop, the Russian Federation welcomed an agreement on a cessation of the military conflict between the US and Iran, with Pakistan's and Qatar's energetic and effective mediation. The MOU paved the way for further negotiations and instilled hope of a fully fledged peace. And yet, at the end of last week, we witnessed strikes exchanged. This exchange could have threatened the ongoing diplomatic efforts. As far as we can tell from the information we're receiving, first, an attack was waged on a Panamanian-flagged tanker in the Hormuz Strait, supposedly by Iranian forces. Then the US struck sites linked to military intelligence, communications, UAV warehouses, and anti-missile defense positions in the territory of the Islamic Republic of Iran. In response, the Iranians attacked the infrastructure of the US armed forces on the territory of Bahrain and Kuwait. We believe that Iran, much like any other UN member state, has the right to self-defense, in accordance with Article 51 of the UN Charter. The enemy's military sites are, in this instance, logical targets. They do not enjoy immunity. We also heard statements by Iranian officials stating that these retaliatory strikes were conducted specifically on US military infrastructure in the region. If, during the strikes, civilian sites were damaged, well then that warrants condemnation. Deliberate attacks on civilian infrastructure, irrespective of the country in which it's located, whether that be Iran or Arab states in the Gulf, are unacceptable. Russia has unswervingly underscored this in different fora, including at the Security Council. Mr. President, we shouldn't forget that there is just one root cause of these outbursts of escalation in the Middle East. That is the US and Israeli aggression against Iran, which is not just a particularly flagrant violation of Iran's sovereignty, but which also posed a threat to the security of many other states in the region. In this context, we regret that our Arab friends were once again held hostage to yet another exchange of strikes between Washington and Tehran. In this case, the problem, from our vantage point, is related to the fact that the instigators of the military escapade against Iran, well, if they did think about the security of their partners in the region, it was only as an afterthought. Having said that, it's encouraging that despite what's transpired, the parties to the Islamabad Memorandum have reasserted that the ceasefire is in place and are continuing technical consultations on various aspects of the agreement reached on the 17th of June. We stand convinced that during this very sensitive period, heavy with responsibility, it's necessary to unswervingly implement the understandings crafted by Washington and Tehran so as to ensure there are no new flare-ups of conflict throughout the entire Middle East, including Lebanon. We expect that work on a comprehensive agreement will facilitate the restoration not only of lasting peace, but also trust between our friends on both sides of the Persian Gulf. We expect that the outcome of these efforts will be the resumption of unfettered and safe navigation in the Hormuz Strait, which would benefit the energy and the food security of the states of the global south. The Russian Federation is open to facilitating the crafting of a comprehensive long-term agreement between the US and Iran, as well as a broader regional agreement, should there be demand for our assistance. Against this backdrop, we'd like to once again draw your attention to the updated version of the Russian concept for collective security in the Persian Gulf zone, which we transmitted to our Arab and Iranian partners at the end of May. This document calls for gradual steps towards unblocking conflict situations, the principle of equal and indivisible security, the development of confidence-building measures, as well as ensuring the freedom of navigation in the Hormuz Strait on the basis of international law. We hope that this initiative will inject momentum into a substantive discussion on how we can build a post-conflict architecture of international relations in the region. We stand ready to continue providing diplomatic support to efforts aimed at stabilizing the situation in the Middle East. Mr. President, on a separate note, we'd like to underscore that the Security Council bears a special responsibility for maintaining negotiations and creating conducive conditions thereto. The Security Council should take a balanced and objective stance. We should avoid whipping up further tensions by making sudden moves, leveling politicized allegations, and ignoring the overall context of the situation. Any possible initiatives should be equidistant and aimed at ensuring a comprehensive settlement. Russia is unswervingly ready to take a constructive role in crafting an overall Security Council position on this issue. I thank you.
I thank the representative of the Russian Federation, and I now give the floor to the representative of the United States.
I want to congratulate the DRC for its presidency, and I would like to welcome once again Foreign Minister Zaidi to the Council, and thank you, Assistant Secretary General Sperhar, for your briefing. Colleagues, 3 months ago, through Resolution 2817, led by the Kingdom of Bahrain, this Council stood with our friends in the Gulf without opposition. As their hospitals, as their airports, energy infrastructure, resorts were under blistering fire from Iranian drones and missiles. And I'll tell you personally, on a personal note, I was just in the Gulf, in the Kingdom, along with the United Arab Emirates and other partners that have been indiscriminately struck by Iran, with their civilian infrastructure repeatedly damaged. I visited some of the locations that the Iranians have hit, and if you have any doubt about Iran's intentions, I encourage each one of you to go. Go and talk with the Bahrainis, visit Manama, visit Abu Dhabi and other locations. They didn't just kind of fire off a bunch of missiles and drones hoping that they would hit a few targets. It was deliberate. It was well planned. It was malicious. I visited the Bahraini Petroleum Company, where I saw where Iran very precisely targeted the fire suppression lines first. They then targeted first responders so that they could not respond. They targeted a site literally in the middle of a neighborhood. Fortunately, the drone didn't explode. Would have potentially killed 2,000 to 3,000 families in a massive, massive explosion. But they did this in a way to maximize damage. Even when they hit fuel tanks, they targeted the largest fuel tank and was sure to hit the bottom of the tank rather than the top so that it fully drained. And again, the fire suppression apparatus, the safety apparatus had been destroyed, and the first responders even, the firemen and women had been attacked so that they couldn't put out the fires. They even aimed at chemical storage areas, again, where direct strikes could have killed thousands of innocent people in what Iran will, I'm sure their representative today will call neighbors and colleagues. That's not how you treat neighbors in my neighborhood where I come from. Meanwhile, they've stopped every ship from transiting the Straits of Hormuz, and it didn't matter if the ship was carrying fertilizers to farmers in Africa, aid to Sudan, fuel to Japan, whether they were involved in this conflict or not. We've heard talk today of root causes. I don't think farmers in East Africa were involved in root causes. Civilian, military, didn't matter. Iran sought to punish the world, all of us, all of you, people who had no interest, no party, even no knowledge of their nuclear aspirations. Just this week, the UN Trade and Development Agency found that Iran's closure of the Strait of Hormuz will have lasting effects on 61 developing economies. Again, let's go back to the talk of root causes from our Russian colleagues. Okay, hit back on military sites, fire back on United States bases in the region, fire back on Israel even. But 61 developing countries that will suffer now, or their crops won't grow, because Iran sought to indiscriminately and seeks to indiscriminately punish the world because of their views in this conflict. Iran cannot, and we cannot allow it to hold the world's economy hostage. So many innocent civilians around the world are being affected. So as a response, Bahrain, our Gulf Arab allies, and others rallied a record-breaking 136 co-sponsors who spoke with one voice. Iran must stop its attacks on its neighbors and leave an international waterway, Straits of Hormuz, open for all. Our friends in the Gulf have rallied another 143 co-sponsors on a separate draft resolution circulated in May that once again calls on Iran to stop its illegal mining. We can't just throw mines, whether it's on land or in the sea, in response to a conflict. Illegal tolls, and respect international law for free passage for all. So we're here today because despite the diplomatic achievements and agreements, Iran still hasn't shown the world a basic level of decency and respect. Instead, they openly defy this council, their neighbors, and basic tenets of diplomacy. Members of this council told Iran, stop the attacks, open the strait. Iran's neighbors respectfully asked Iran, stop the violence, open the strait. Even their closest partners told them privately, stop the mining, stop the tolling, and open the strait. And just 2 weeks ago, the United States signed a memorandum of understanding with Iran. Its most basic premise, the straits, international waterways must be open. Attacks on civilian shipping must stop. And we're here today because Iran ignored that. Last week, Iran fired missiles and drones at civilian infrastructure in Bahrain and Kuwait. Why? Why? They also fired at commercial vessels transiting Omani territories. So again, we just heard, well, Iran has a right to defend itself. Okay. Do they have the right to attack Kuwait and attack random civilian ships flagged by Panama and Singapore in international waters? Is that a right under Article 51 of the UN Charter? I would think not. So again, let's be clear what happened here. After 136 countries told Iran to stop, Iran fired again. After its neighbors pleaded for de-escalation, Iran fired again. After the United States sat down for weeks and pursued diplomacy at the highest levels, the Vice President of the United States signed a memorandum of understanding, Iran fired again. And after the Iranian people dared to speak out for a new Iran, The regime battered its own people, and they're still spending millions on internet suppression. Why? As an aside, as a tragic aside, executions in Iran have surged despite the internet blackout. We know this. Javad Zamani, Abdul Fazi Sayadi, 2 students, young men, were just executed 10 days ago in Iran. You know their crime? As it was rammed through a revolutionary court with no representation, their crime was, quote, waging war against God. That was their crime. That's the crime. And I look at their representative. I don't know how he lays his head on his pillow at night. But whatever false choice the Ayatollah's cronies present him, it's not the only choice. Amnesty International says these protesters are still the ones who weren't, the 40,000 who weren't machine gunned in the streets in the period of one weekend. Amnesty International says they're being held in secret. They're being tortured into confessions. They have no counsel. And in some cases, being publicly hung to send a message. There's an old scripture that says, quote, I have set before you life and death, blessing and curse. Iran cannot keep choosing death and curse. And today, we once again urge Iran to revert to the path of peace and dialogue. The world is not with Iran. Iran's own people are not with this regime. Its neighbors are not with this regime. Colleagues on this council and all responsible nations, it is a time for choosing. And please make your stance clear. These attacks are fundamentally unlawful. They are inconsistent with the Memorandum of Understanding, and they are certainly in violation of this council's resolution 2817. And they're a disservice to the future of the Iranian people. I cannot stress enough the possibility of real, transformative, positive opportunity for the nation and people of Iran is on the table. But President Trump's patience is not unlimited. The world cannot continue to suffer, and Iran must abide by its obligations to this council that this council voted for without opposition, and the world must hold this regime to account. I thank you.
I thank the representative of the United States. I now give the floor to the representative of Liberia.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. President. I have the honor to deliver this statement on behalf of the A3, namely the Democratic Republic of the Congo, Somalia, and my own country, Liberia. We thank the Assistant Secretary General for her comprehensive update on the latest developments in the region. The A3 congratulates you, Ambassador Zenon, and the Democratic Republic of the Congo on assuming the presidency for the month of July. Of course, you can count on the A3's full support. We thank the Colombian delegation for the stellar stewardship of the Council last month. We welcome the presence of the distinguished Foreign Minister of Bahrain in today's meeting, as well as the representative of Kuwait. Mr. President, the A3 is deeply alarmed by the recent attacks on Bahrain and Kuwait. The explicit admission of responsibility for these actions is no mere footnote. It is a warning flare over our already fragile region, signaling a dangerous escalation in the wider pattern of hostilities across the Middle East. These renewed escalations in the Gulf threaten to widen the circle of instability, endanger regional security, and send tremors through the global economy. At such a moment, the principles of international law cannot be treated as optional instruments of convenience, because in truth, they are the vital guardrails preventing crisis from becoming catastrophe. Therefore, we call for absolute respect for the sovereignty, territorial integrity, and the political independence of all states, especially the peaceful Gulf nations. We urge all parties to choose dialogue over brinkmanship, restraint over retaliation, and diplomacy over the dangerous illusion that force can deliver lasting security. In this regard, the A3 welcomes the June 17 signing of the Memorandum of Understanding between the United States and Iran, achieved through the mediation of Pakistan. We strongly urge all parties to strictly adhere to their ceasefire commitments and protect the integrity of these fragile talks. A diplomatic opening, once closed, is rarely easily restored. Recent military actions must not be allowed to extinguish the possibility of dialogue. Sustainable peace can only be built at the negotiating table, never on the ruins of confrontation. We reiterate our urgent call for the protection of civilians and civilian infrastructure. In every conflict, innocent lives must never become the currency of political calculation or military advantage. Commitments undertaken by the parties must be fully respected, faithfully implemented, and honored in good faith. Equally critical is the guarantee of freedom of navigation in international waterways, including the Strait of Hormuz. This is not merely a regional concern. It is a global necessity. No nation should mistake strategic waterways for levers of pressure, nor allow the arteries of international commerce to be held hostage to conflict. All parties must refrain from actions that undermine maritime security and the free flow of trade upon which the global economy depends. We demand full compliance with Resolution 2817 of 2026, which insists on an immediate end to threats and provocations targeting regional security and maritime commerce. To conclude, Mr. President, this Council must help ensure that the region steps back from the edge and returns to the path of reason, restraint, and responsible diplomacy. The choice before all parties remains stark: either widening the flares of conflict or widening the doors of dialogue. The A3 urges the latter because in the Middle East, as everywhere, peace is not preserved by the loudness of weapons, but by the courage of wisdom. I thank you for your kind attention.
Je remercie.
I thank the representative of Liberia, and I now give the floor to the representative of Latvia.
Merci, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you, President. At the outset, I'd like to congratulate the Democratic Republic of the Congo on assuming its function as President of the Security Council for the month of July. We wish you every success. You can count on my delegation's support.
I also thank Colombia for the excellent steering of Council's work last month. And I thank Assistant Secretary General Spejar for her valuable contribution. And I do welcome the participation of His Excellency Abdulatif bin Rashid Al Zayani, Minister of Foreign Affairs of the Kingdom of Bahrain, to today's meeting, as well as the representative of Kuwait. Mr. President, we are once again meeting due to reckless attacks perpetrated by Iran, this time against Bahrain and Kuwait, on 28th of June, well after the signing of the Memorandum of Understanding on Cessation of Hostilities. These continuous attacks threaten regional stability, endanger the ceasefire agreement enshrined in the MOU. Latvia categorically condemns these attacks against civilians and civilian infrastructure, and we express our solidarity with Bahrain, Kuwait, and our partners in the Gulf. International law, international humanitarian law must be respected by all parties at all times. And we reiterate that for diplomacy to succeed, a complete cessation of hostilities is critical, in full compliance with the Memorandum of Understanding and Resolution 2817. Iran must cease its campaign of unprovoked strikes against its neighbors and abandon any attempts to disrupt free and safe navigation through the Strait of Hormuz. This includes demining the strait and seizing any and all threats and attacks against maritime vessels. For months now, Iran has inflicted suffering on the most vulnerable around the globe by disrupting global supply chains, leading to spiking energy prices and endangering global food security. This follows decades of Iran's destabilizing activities in the wider region. And let me remind also the Council of the fact that Iran has supplied Russia with drones and missiles for its war of aggression against Ukraine, the same weapons it is now using against its neighbors in the Gulf. Mr. President, we reiterate our support for the ongoing negotiations between the United States and Iran and appreciate the mediation efforts by Pakistan and Qatar, among others. A long-term sustainable solution to the threat Iran poses to the international rules-based order must be found. And it is imperative to ensure that Iran never acquires a nuclear weapon, engages with the IAEA, and ceases its destabilizing activities in the region and beyond, including attempts to hold an international waterway hostage, in clear violation of the United Nations Convention on the Law of the Sea. Latvia will remain a constructive partner in these efforts, and we continue to call on Iran to comply with its obligations under international law. I thank you.
Je remercie.
I thank the representative of Latvia. I now give the floor to the representative of Pakistan.
Thank you. Mr. President, let me join. I think it was China's turn. Yeah, please, go ahead.
Je rectifie.
Minor correction. I now give the floor to the representative of China.
Thank you, President. At the outset, I would like to congratulate the Democratic Republic of the Congo on assuming presidency of the Council for this month. The Chinese delegation will fully cooperate with you and your colleagues. I would also like to take this opportunity to express my appreciation to Colombia for its work as president of last month. I thank ASG Spejar for the briefing and welcome His Excellency Foreign Minister El Zayani, as well as the representatives of Iran and Kuwait to this meeting. Recently, the United States and Iran exchanged a new round of strikes, with targets in Bahrain and Kuwait affected. China consistently advocates for observance by all parties of the purposes and principles of the UN Charter and opposes the use of threat of use of force in international relations. We call on all parties to stay calm, exercise restraint, and refrain from provocative rhetoric and military adventures to prevent straining and escalating the already tense situation. The sovereignty, security, and territorial integrity of regional countries should be respected. Civilian and non-military targets should be protected. China welcomes the US-Iran follow-up consultations on MOU facilitated by Pakistan and Qatar to reach consensus on the upcoming negotiation mechanism. Facts have proven time and again that neither force nor might can resolve problems and that dialogue and negotiation is the only right choice. With the joint efforts by all, the conflict finally made a turn towards dialogue. However, the ceasefire remains fragile. Whether peace can truly be achieved depends on the joint efforts of all parties. China wishes to highlight the following 3 points. First, comprehensive ceasefire and cessation of hostilities must be consolidated. This war has already caused tremendous losses to countries in the region. The flames of war must not be allowed to flare up. The US and Iran should maximize good faith, implement the MOU in earnest, keep the momentum of negotiations going on, and overcome difficulties and interference with a view to reaching at an early date a comprehensive agreement that is mutually agreed upon by themselves, accepted by regional countries, and welcomed by the international community. Second, normal navigation in the strait must be resumed as soon as possible. The Strait of Hormuz is a strait for international navigation. Restoring security and free passage in the strait helps maintain the stability of global production and supply chains and serves the common interests of regional countries and the international community at large. The arrangements for the strait must respect the coastal states' sovereignty and legitimate rights and interests, while also complying with international practice and the common aspirations of all countries. Third, relations among regional countries must be improved. The Middle East, including the Gulf, cannot once again become an arena for the rivalry among big powers or for victim to geopolitical games. China supports regional countries in achieving genuine strategic autonomy, upholding a common, comprehensive, cooperative, and sustainable security concept, resolving differences through dialogue and consultations, exploring a new regional security architecture, and firmly taking their destiny into their own hands. As a responsible major power and a sincere partner of regional countries, China stays committed to upholding President Xi Jinping's 4 propositions for maintaining and promoting peace and stability in the Middle East. Along with the international community, China will play a constructive role in finding a political solution to regional hotspot issues and in maintaining and promoting regional peace and stability. Thank you, President.
Je remercie.
I thank the
And let me assure you also Pakistan's full support. And we also commend Ambassador Leonor and the Colombian delegation for a very successful presidency last month. I would also like to welcome the presence of His Excellency Al Zayani, the Honorable Foreign Minister of Bahrain, in today's meeting, and we have listened attentively to your statement. We also welcome the participation of the representatives of Iran and Kuwait in this meeting. President, it has been Pakistan's consistent belief that the only way to settle the situation in the region conclusively and comprehensively is through diplomacy, dialogue, and negotiations. From the outset, Pakistan has maintained a principled position with respect to the inadmissibility of any use of force outside the bounds of international law. the unwarranted strikes against Iran and those targeting the GCC countries. Pakistan has been categorically condemning attacks against the GCC countries and once again expresses its full solidarity with our brothers and sisters in Bahrain and Kuwait. We had all along cautioned that if not contained, this conflict would directly impact the peace and security situation in the region with the potential of wider geographical conflagration. President Pakistan initiated its mediation efforts out of a deep sense of responsibility towards promotion of regional and global peace and stability and the protection of precious lives and livelihoods. Pakistan has been engaged from the beginning under the firm conviction that any further escalation and continuation in fighting would only exacerbate human suffering and carry grave consequences for regional and international peace and security. The conclusion of the Islamabad Memorandum of Understanding between the Islamic Republic of Iran and the United States of America reflects a victory of robust and determined diplomacy. Our efforts are aimed at saving lives, de-escalating the situation, and opening the space for structured dialogue leading to an enduring mutual understanding and a final deal. We thank the parties and our partners, especially Qatar, Saudi Arabia, Turkey, Egypt, as well as China, for reposing their trust in and support for Pakistan's mediation efforts. Pakistan has stepped up its diplomatic engagement with key regional and international stakeholders to facilitate earnest follow-up and implementation of the Islamabad Memorandum of Understanding by Iran and the United States, in line with the Pakistan-Qatar joint statement issued on 21st of June 2026. And yesterday, Pakistan and Qatar concluded separate meetings with the US and Iranian negotiators in Doha, with positive progress made on issues related to the Islamabad Memorandum of Understanding, building on the outcomes of the Lake Lucerne Summit. The parties agreed to continue discussions over the coming period, with the next meeting to be scheduled at the earliest possible time. So we remain hopeful and optimistic that we will continue to see meaningful progress in the coming days. Pakistan's leadership remains engaged with the parties, our partners, and the regional countries. We continue to facilitate dialogue and confidence-building measures to prevent any escalation and to sustain the diplomatic engagement. From our perspective, the fact that the talks are continuing and the parties are on the negotiating table is a significant positive outcome. The channels of communication remain open, and we are persisting in our efforts geared towards ushering peace, security, and tranquility that will benefit the entire region and all countries without exception. I thank you.
Je remercie le représentant du Pakistan.
I thank the representative of Pakistan. I now give the floor to the representative of Colombia.
Mr. President, I thank the presidency for convening this meeting. And since this is the first time that I am taking the floor, I take this opportunity to wish you every success in your work this month. In addition, I would like to thank the Assistant Secretary General, Ms. Spiha, for her briefing. I convey my greetings to the delegations joining us today. In addition, I welcome the Foreign Minister of Bahrain, Mr. Abdulatif bin Rashid Al Zayani. Colombia condemns in the strongest terms the recent attacks targeting Kuwait and the Kingdom of Bahrain and expresses its solidarity with the peoples of both countries. These events represent a grave threat to international peace and security and reveal the precarious situation facing the region. The pattern of attacks and reprisals is not building security for any state. Rather, on the contrary, it is ramping up mistrust and entrenching a dynamic of confrontation whose consequences are felt beyond the actors directly involved. This merely fuels a cycle of instability which heightens risks for the civilian population, shrinks space for dialogue, and distances the prospects for a political solution. In this context, my country reiterates that all states have the obligation to act in accordance with the Charter of the United Nations, respecting the sovereignty and territorial integrity of states. These principles cannot be applied selectively. Rather, they represent legal obligations binding equally on all states and represent the basis of the international order. Mr. President, at the same time, Colombia deems it essential to preserve the momentum of ongoing diplomatic efforts, and we call on all parties to exercise maximum restraint, avoiding any action which might exacerbate the situation or lead to a greater escalation. In this regard, the recent Memorandum of Understanding between Iran and the United States represents an opportunity that must not be squandered. Although the events over the last few days have highlighted the fragility of this process, they also bear out the need to step up efforts to prevent the current escalation from either reducing or shutting off the political space that has begun to emerge. It is incumbent on all parties to act with the necessary responsibility and consistency to ensure that this opportunity gives rise to concrete results and is to the conditions that are conducive to reaching a lasting agreement. Colombia reiterates that only through respect for international law, good faith, and the peaceful settlement of disputes will it be possible to prevent a greater escalation and to preserve international peace and security. Thank you very much.
Je remercie.
I thank the representative of Colombia for her statement. I now give the floor to the representative of France. Thank you, President. Congratulations on acceding to the presidency of the Council. Without a doubt, you have our full support, and also our congratulations to Colombia on the very dense, active Colombian presidency in June. I thank ASG Speha for political affairs. Ms. Speha, thank you for your very specific briefing. The Council is meeting at the behest of the Kingdom of Bahrain. France would like to extend its greetings to the Minister of Foreign Affairs, His Excellency Mr. Abdulatif bin Rashid Al Zayani. We're meeting at the request of Bahrain following Iranian drone strikes on Bahrain on the 28th of June, attacks which resulted in the destruction of residential buildings in particular. These attacks, as well as Iranian ballistic missile attacks on Kuwait, attacks waged on the 27th of June, are unacceptable. These attacks constitute a flagrant violation of Resolution 2817, adopted by the Council in March of this year. France condemns these Iranian attacks in the firmest possible terms. We reiterate our unswerving commitment to the security, sovereignty, and the territorial integrity of all our partners in the Middle East. Since the start of this crisis, France has stood side by side with our partners as they faced unilateral attacks on their territory by Iran. We remain fully committed to participating in their defense. President, these attacks once again demonstrate the need for a lasting and comprehensive de-escalation in the region. The MOU signed by the US and Iran must pave the way for a lasting diplomatic solution, one capable of restoring the security and stability of the region, as well as of stabilizing the global economy. France supports the mediators' efforts, as well as those of all parties, geared towards ensuring the discussions make headway and are concluded, and this across the various chapters. First and foremost, we must move without delay towards a complete reopening of the Hormuz Strait. The resumption of maritime traffic without restrictions, without tolls, is a necessary precondition for regional stability and the stability of the global economy. Attacks on commercial vessels must end immediately. Navigation through the strait without any must remain free, unconditional, and unrestricted, in keeping with the law of the sea. France, together with the UK and almost 30 states from various continents and the region, put forward the initiative of an independent, neutral, and defensive multinational mission, which stands ready to contribute to efforts to restoring the conditions for the safety of navigation throughout this international maritime route. This mission could participate in the demining of the strait and accompany commercial vessels transiting the strait. Dialogue is ongoing with all of the stakeholders to that end. Mr. President, detailed negotiations are also underway on the nuclear issue. We fully support efforts seeking to craft a robust agreement on non-proliferation, guaranteeing in a verifiable way that Iran never acquires a nuclear weapon. It is only the signing and implementation of such an agreement that would allow us to contemplate, when the time comes, the lifting of relevant Security Council sanctions, which were reimposed in September of last year. President, France calls on all parties to abstain from any actions which could provoke a new military escalation, the consequences of which would be disastrous for the region and the entire world. We also call for perseverance on the path towards a diplomatic settlement. France is mobilized to contribute alongside parties to the enthronement of lasting peace. I thank you.
Merci, le représentant.
I thank the representative of France. I now give the floor to the representative of the Islamic Republic of Iran.
Thank you. In the name of God, the compassionate and merciful, at the outset, I congratulate Congo on assuming the presidency of the Security Council and commend Colombia for its successful presidency in June. We have taken note of the statement delivered by the ASG, Ms. Espeha. Mr. President, at a time when technical talks facilitated by our Pakistani and Qatari brothers are focused on implementing the Islamabad Memorandum of Understanding, the Council is expected to refrain from convening a meeting that risks undermining these ongoing efforts. I categorically reject the baseless allegation made by the United States. Once again, the representative of the United States has resorted to lies and disinformation against Iran. The facts are clear. In the midst of diplomatic negotiation together with the Israeli regime, the United States betrayed diplomacy twice and launched 2 wars of aggression against Iran in blatant violation of the Charter of the United Nations and international law. These violations constitute a grave threat to international peace and security. I also reject the unfounded accusation made by certain Western members of the Council and the representative of Bahrain. Instead of addressing the root cause of the current crisis, they have ignored the unlawful aggression committed against Iran, remained silent in the face of these serious violations, and sought to shift blame onto the victims. Their double standards and hypocritical behavior have deprived them of any credibility to lecture others. Against this background, I would like to make the following points. First, Iran is the main victim of the wars of aggression launched by the United States and Israeli regime. The role of the victims and aggressor must not be reversed. The United States and Israeli regime have flagrantly violated the UN Charter and international law, including international humanitarian law, by imposing 2 unjustified and unwarranted wars against the Iranian people. During the attacks in June 2025 and between 28 February and 8 April 2026, the United States deliberately targeted civilians and civilian infrastructure, including hospitals, sport facilities, schools, and cultural sites. Even the President of the United States and other senior U.S. officials publicly admitted to and openly boasted about committing these heinous war crimes against the Iranian people and civilian infrastructure. More than 4,800 civilians, including women and children, were killed. The killing of schoolgirls in Minab remains one of the most horrific examples of this atrocious crime. The Security Council failure to discharge its responsibilities has reinforced impunity and emboldened further unlawful acts. The United States and the Israeli regime bear full responsibility for all the consequences of these wars of aggression and must be held fully accountable. Second, the United States has repeatedly violated the 8 April ceasefire and its commitments under the Islamabad Memorandum of Understanding by launching further attacks against Iran's sovereignty and territorial integrity. Iran has exercised its inherent right of self-defense in accordance with Article 51 of the Charter. Its defensive measures were directed against U.S. military facilities and bases, and its assets in the region from which attacks against Iran were launched. We strongly condemn the United States' recent air attacks and aggression of 27 June 2026 against Iran's southern coastal facilities, which constituted a flagrant violation of Article 2, Paragraph 4 of the Charter, as well as a clear breach of Paragraph 1 of the Islamabad MOU. Third, certain members referred to the politically motivated Resolution 2817. Iran's position regarding Resolution 2817 is clear, consistent, and well documented in the communication circulated as official document of the Security Council. Iran has rejected this politically motivated resolution. The resolution was adopted through a one-sided and politicized process and ignored the root cause of the crisis, denied Iran's inherent right of self-defense, and failed to determine the United States and Israeli regime as aggressors. No Security Council resolution can deprive a member state of its inherent right of self-defense under the UN Charter. Should aggression against Iran continue, or should the United States continue to violate the MOU, Iran will continue to exercise this inherent right to protect its sovereignty and territorial integrity. Rather than blaming Iran, these Council members should call on the United States to honor its commitments, cease its unlawful actions, and comply fully with the UN Charter and international law. Fourth, despite the deep mistrust to the United States caused by its repeated violation and the US betrayal of diplomacy, Iran engaged in diplomacy in good faith through negotiations facilitated by Pakistan and supported by Qatar, Turkey, Saudi Arabia, Egypt, China, and the Russian Federation. This process resulted in the signing of the MOU on 17 June. We express our appreciation to Pakistan and Qatar for their tireless efforts and invaluable contribution to this process. The MOU clearly requires the United States to negotiate in good faith, and in particular to refrain from any threat or use of force against Iran. This commitment constituted a fundamental and indispensable obligation under the MOU, serving as an essential condition for preserving the confidence, stability, and good faith necessary for the successful continuation of the negotiation process. Yet, by launching another act of aggression and relying on a unilateral and legally unfounded interpretation of the MOU, the United States committed a material breach of its commitment and seriously undermined the diplomatic process. Fifth, Iran remains fully committed to implementing the MOU, including its provisions concerning the Strait of Hormuz, provided that the United States faithfully fulfill its own obligations. Paragraph 5 of the MOU provide, and I quote, "The Islamic Republic of Iran will make arrangement using its best efforts for the safe passage of commercial vessels free of charge for a period of 60 days from the Persian Gulf to the Sea of Oman and vice versa. The transit of commercial vessels will resume immediately, and taking into account the need to remove technical and military obstacles, demining by the Islamic Republic of Iran will be completed within 30 days. End of the quote. As has been stated by Iran's foreign minister, under the agreed arrangement, responsibility for the management of maritime navigation through the Strait of Hormuz, including its reopening and all necessary demining operation, rests exclusively with Iran. The implementation of this arrangement is currently underway in accordance with the MOU, and Iran has launched technical dialogue with the Sultanate of Oman. Any external interference or attempt to establish parallel arrangement would violate the MOU, undermine its implementation, delay the restoration of normal commercial navigation, put at risk safe maritime navigation, and increase regional tension. We therefore call upon all states, particularly the United States, to respect in good faith the letter and spirit of the MOU and refrain from reinterpreting its contents or action that interferes with its implementation. Sixth, Iran reiterates its commitment to the freedom of navigation and continue to ensure that such freedom is granted for all without interference. It should have been clear that the presence of US military bases and foreign interference in the Persian Gulf region brings nothing but insecurity. They have put at risk the regional security in general and the maritime safety in particular. The US has no coastal border in our region. It is not their waters, it is not their neighborhood. Defining and concluding a security regime for our region is the exclusive joint responsibility of the neighboring countries, and the US and others, rather than a destructive military presence or interference, needs to support regional countries to fulfill such responsibility. In conclusion, the priority must be the full implementation of the MOU and the continuation of negotiations toward a comprehensive deal. The Security Council should support this process, encourage full compliance with the MOU, and refrain from provocative actions that could undermine diplomacy or further escalate tensions. I thank you.
Je remercie le représentant.
I thank the representative of the Islamic Republic of Iran, and I now give the floor to the representative of Kuwait.
Shukran.
Thank you, Mr. President. At the outset, I would like to thank your presidency for convening this emergency important meeting at a time when our region is undergoing very critical situations. Against the backdrop of the continued escalation that undermines sovereignty and territorial integrity of countries and is a threat to international peace and security, despite the glimpses of hope, we thank ASG for her briefing. We welcome the participation of His Excellency Dr. Abdul Latif Rashid Al Zayani, Minister of Foreign Affairs of Bahrain, in our meeting. We reiterate that convening a meeting today should not be a procedural response to an incidental development. It should be a clear step in the Council's shouldering its responsibility in maintaining international peace and security and in addressing any action that undermine sovereignty, territorial integrity, and security of peoples of these countries to risk. Kuwait condemns in the strongest terms the Iranian unwarranted repeated attacks against the territory and airspace of Kuwait, as well as its critical infrastructure. We also condemn attacks on Bahrain using ballistic missiles and drones, in addition to other kind of missiles in flagrant violation to states' sovereignty and breach to rules of international law and the UN Charter. This reflects an unaccepted approach to escalation. Such attacks should not be seen as incidental or isolated incidents or isolated developments. They are part of a repeated pattern of hostilities that risk the safety and security in the region. It is a threat also to the navigational safety in the region. The state of Kuwait, since the beginning of this wave of escalation to repeated attacks, totaling 893 attacks with drones and 873 attacks with ballistic missiles and 10 cruise attacks, which led to many casualties, including a child. That's in addition to the material damage in vital infrastructure and critical facilities, including the Kuwait International Airport and the facilities related to the safety of international air navigation. Kuwait states that the efficiency of its military and armed forces helped to prevent further loss. Protecting the lives of those in Kuwait will remain our priority. That is non-negotiable. Mr. President, the state of Kuwait holds the Islamic Republic of Iran fully responsible for these attacks, and Kuwait also stresses its firm and clear position that it has never been and will never be a party to any military escalation. Kuwait has not allowed and will never allow its territories or airspace or territorial waters to be used to launch any hostilities against any other country. This is a principled, firm position based on the policy of the state of Kuwait in respecting sovereignty of states, and good neighborliness, and upholding international law and the UN Charter. However, this responsible position should not be met with attacks. Restraint should not be used as a pretext to target sovereignty or for neighboring countries to bear the consequences of confrontations not of their choosing and to which they have not been a party. State sovereignty are not a political margin that could be overlooked in cases of tension. Peoples are not a lever of pressure in any confrontation. International law is not a selective obligation to be invoked when need and ignored in cases of escalation. Accordingly, Kuwait reiterates its call to immediately halt these hostilities and to respect sovereignty and territorial integrity of states and to refrain from the use or threat of use of force, and calls for the full compliance to rules of international law, including principles of good neighborliness and non-interference in internal affairs of states. Mr. President, Kuwait reiterates its full support and solidarity with the sisterly Kingdom of Bahrain in all efforts and measures it is taking to protecting its sovereignty, territory, and peoples. The security of Kuwait and of Bahrain and of GCC countries are integrated and inseparable. Any threat to one country is a threat to all other countries. Our stability is joint and common. The state of Kuwait commends the Gulf, Arab, and international positions which condemned these attacks, and we see in this condemnation a clear message that international community does not accept targeting safe countries and does not accept turning the territories, facilities, and airspace of these countries to an arena to transfer the tensions. Mr. President, The Security Council has expressed through its resolution 2817 of 2026 its position regarding the attacks on countries of the region, including Kuwait, and on Bahrain. It reiterated the importance of respecting states' sovereignty and territorial integrity and to maintain maritime safety. Therefore, the state of Kuwait reiterates that the test to the credibility of the Council does not lie in adopting resolutions, but rather on implementing these resolutions and preventing the repeated violations. The resolutions have been adopted to address these violations. Those resolutions have stated that the impunity emboldens failing to take a decisive action would open the door to uncalculated escalation. Therefore, the state of Kuwait calls on the Security Council to convey a clear message rejecting these attacks and any action that undermines states' sovereignty and territorial integrity, and should call on Iran to end its attacks and refrain from any actions that can escalate and expand the scope of the conflict. Mr. President, Kuwait and Bahrain have endured severe attacks recently. However, the state of Kuwait reiterates that security and safety cannot be achieved by missiles or drones, cannot be maintained by threats and tensions. It can be achieved by dialogue, de-escalation, respect to international law, and address root causes of crises through peaceful means. In this connection, the state of Kuwait welcomes the diplomatic efforts that led to an MOU between the United States and Iran. The MOU addresses the outstanding issues between the two countries, including the halt of the acts of hostility and ensure maritime freedom in the Strait of Hormuz. State of Kuwait commends efforts by friendly and sisterly countries, top of which Qatar and Pakistan. That's in addition to other international endeavors to ensure de-escalation and to reduce tension. However, welcoming this step does not absolve any party from its legal obligations and does not justify in any way the continued aggression on states that have not been party to the confrontation. The success of any diplomatic effort hinges on respecting it and by halting all hostilities and to have concrete results enjoyed by countries and peoples of the region. They should not remain ink on paper or a fragile framework destroyed by repeated attacks. The state of Kuwait reiterates that any future arrangements on the security in the region or the free navigation in the Strait of Hormuz should be based on the respect for international law, the principles of sovereignty and the right of coastal states, as well as the international navigational rights. It should not be at the expense of the GCC countries or without taking their legitimate interests into consideration. Mr. President, the state of Kuwait has proven throughout different crises that it is a state that believes in diplomacy and supports dialogue and upholds peaceful solutions. At the same time, it will not relent in defending its sovereignty, territorial integrity, security, and people. The restraint exercised by Kuwait is an expression of responsibility and wisdom. It's not a sign of weakness or a sign meaning that we accept the status quo. Upholding international law does not mean silence when it is violated. In conclusion, the state of Kuwait reiterates that the security of the Gulf is inseparable of the security of the region. Security in the region is not in the interest of the region, it is the interest of energy, economy, international peace and security, and the state of Kuwait will remain committed in upholding international law, in supporting dialogue. It will continue to reject any attack against its sovereignty, security, or territorial integrity, or against its people. Thank you, Mr. President.
Je remercie.
I thank the representative of Kuwait for the statement. The representative of Bahrain has requested the floor to make an additional statement. I give him the floor.
شكرا سيد الرئيس.
Thank you, Mr. President. The Council, once again, has listened to a narrative that tries to twist the facts and to change the facts on the ground. However, facts are not measured by statements, but by documented acts. Mr. President, today's emergency meeting pertains to documented aggressions that targeted civilian objects, infrastructure, residential areas, and vital facilities in the Kingdom of Bahrain in a clear violation of the Charter, international law, and IHL, and Security Council Resolution 2817. These violations cannot be justified. No language can be used to justify them. No words can justify them. These violations continued a few days after the signing of the Islamabad MOU. This begs legitimate questions vis-à-vis Iran's commitment to its international obligations and the principle of good intent in the implementation of agreements. Mr. President, respect of sovereignty and commitment to international obligations and non-use of force or the threat of the use of force, these are not selective principles to be applied when they serve the interests of a particular state. However, they are preemptory principles that international law is based upon. Hence, any attempts to justify aggressions or distract the Council's attention away from such aggressions does not change their legal status and does not absolve Iran of any responsibility vis-à-vis these. We adhere to peace. We reiterate that. We support diplomatic solutions. However, at the same time, we believe that true peace is only based on respect of commitments and obligations. Agreements are not measured by what is announced when they are signed, but rather by what is implemented afterwards. In this regard, what we are asking today is clear and specific. Iran needs to immediately and fully adhere to Security Council Resolution 2817 in clear language that is unambiguous, as it has condemned Iran's aggressions and requested that they would be seized and that the sovereignty of states and their territorial integrity be respected. I thank you.
Je remercie le...
I thank the representative of Bahrain for that statement. The representative of the United States has also requested the floor to make a further statement. I give him the floor.
Thank you, Mr. President. Unfortunately, the representative of the regime started his remarks today by saying, apparently, this council should not meet, should not speak. Let me remind you where you are. This is not Tehran. This is the United States of America. This is the United Nations Security Council. You will not silence this body. The representative goes on to say that the ambassador from Bahrain, the foreign minister, myself, and other members of this body are full of lies, that we're lying. Let me ask you, what here is a lie? Who's lying here? Is this Arab family in Bahrain in a residential neighborhood whose home was destroyed by an Iranian Shahed drone? Are they lying? Crown Plaza Hotel full of tourists? Are they lying? First responders whose headquarters were struck deliberately so that they couldn't put out fires? Were they lying? Is this hypocrisy? Is this what this council is here to denounce today? I asked the representative, are these lies? Are these photographs? Are these lies? I'd say not. And then thirdly, we hear claims of self-defense in accordance with the UN Charter. My message, our message to the Iranian regime, the UN Security Council's message is closing international waterways is not self-defense. He claimed that threatening commercial vessels is part of their sovereignty and self-defense. I ask, did the Singaporean Air Force or military attack Tehran or attack Iran? No. But yet Iran attacked a Singaporean flagged commercial vessel. We have a representative here. We have the ambassador here from Panama. Panamanian flagged vessels were attacked just in this last week. Did Panama attack Iran? Is that self-defense against Panama? Please, I hope the representative responds. I don't think Panama attacked Iran. I don't think Singapore attacked Iran. I don't think the rest of the world has attacked Iran. What we're hearing, and let's call it out for what it is, driving up the price of energy, driving up the cost of food, denying 61, according to the UN, 61 developing countries basic life-saving aid. It is a cynical, sad, and sick attempt at global blackmail, plain and simple. And we need to be crystal clear from this body that it is absolutely unacceptable. The United Nations Security Council, if it has a backbone, won't stand for it. The world won't stand for it. And that we will hold this Iranian regime accountable for its attacks on our populations around the world through this sick attempt at global coercion. I thank you, Mr. President.
Je remercie le...
I thank the representative of the United States for that statement. The representative of the Islamic Republic of Iran has asked for the floor to make a further statement. I give him the floor.
Thank you. I would be brief. In response to my brother Jamal from Bahrain, there is no doubt that certain regional countries, including Bahrain, facilitated this aggression by allowing their territory and their space to be used by aggressors. The international responsibility alongside that the United States and Israeli regime is clear and undeniable. You know that according to the General Assembly resolution, providing your space and soil to aggressor is act of aggression. And I think that it should be clear for our neighboring countries that the presence of American and spaces in their countries not only does not bring security to their countries, but also make their countries vulnerable. And response to representative of the United States, I ask him that maritime blockade is a collective punishment. You were in war with Iran. Why you prevent the international vessels could reach to the Iranian ports? You cannot deny the facts. The fact is that 70% of Americans and taxpayers oppose your administration war policy toward Iran. They believe that Americans' interests have been sacrificed for the Israeli interest. And in Iran, reality of the nation-state relationship is also evident in the funeral of Supreme Leader, which will take place next week. You can close your eyes and ears, but you cannot change the truth.
Je remercie le représentant.
I thank the representative of the Islamic Republic of Iran. The representative of Bahrain has asked to make a further statement. I give him the floor. This will be for the last time.
Thank you, Mr. President. I apologize for taking the floor once again, but I just wanted to respond to the representative of Iran once again. Resolution 2817 has condemned these acts. There is no justification for them. Hence, the representative of Iran needs to go back to this resolution We're meeting here not to make statements, but to look at acts and crimes that are documented, committed by Iran in Bahrain and the region. Hence, the justifications and pretexts provided by the representative of Iran cannot be justified. And the best evidence is the resolution adopted by the Council 2817. Hence, I will not speak at much length. This is a call for them to read this resolution carefully. This is the voice of the international community against Iran and its attacks.
Je remercie.
I thank the representative of Bahrain for that statement. I see no further requests for the floor. The meeting is adjourned.
you.